The smoke alarm in the corner suite of the Alderton Hotel was still beeping when Serena Voss walked in and found her new husband standing over three unconscious men in Italian suits, a cut above his left eyebrow, and their 6-year-old daughter asleep against his shoulder like none of it had happened. He looked at Serena across the wreckage of the room, overturned chairs, shattered glass, one man's Rolex ticking quietly against the marble floor, and said very calmly, "Close the door." That was the moment Serena understood that the contract she'd signed 8 weeks ago wasn't what she thought it was. But that's not where this story starts. Let me take you back. 11 weeks before that hotel room, before the smoke alarm and the unconscious men, and the way her heart did something complicated when he said close the door like he'd been protecting people his whole life and was tired of pretending otherwise. Hit the like button and drop a comment with where you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The conference room at Maddox and Hale smelled like carpet cleaner and serious money. Serena Voss sat in a chair that cost more than her monthly rent, wearing the blazer with the slightly frayed left cuff she'd been meaning to replace for 8 months, and tried to look like a woman who belonged there. She'd gotten the call 3 days ago. A referral from someone she'd met at a conference 2 years prior, back when she still attended conferences, back when she still had a company to represent. That company was gone now. What remained was a reputation, a degree from a school that didn't open doors in this city, and $17,000 in debt that had her mother's name on it, Ms. Voss. The woman across the table was named Constance, no last name offered. She wore reading glasses she didn't seem to need and spoke like she'd rehearsed this sentence enough times that it no longer sounded like a sentence. "Are you clear on what we're proposing?" Serena was not entirely clear. She was approximately 60% clear, which was 60% more than she'd been 20 minutes ago. "You want me to get married," she said. "We want you to enter a contractual partnership," Constance said, "with a man named Elliot Strand. Duration, 18 months. In exchange, you receive the interim CEO position at Caldwell Ventures, full salary and benefits commencing immediately, and the assumption of the outstanding medical debt currently held under your mother's name." Serena's throat tightened at that last part. Her mother had been out of the hospital for 4 months. The bills hadn't stopped arriving. "Why me?" she asked. Constance exchanged a glance with the man beside her, Hale, presumably, or Maddox. She hadn't caught which, and something passed between them that Serena couldn't read. The arrangement requires someone with operational experience, but no existing ties to the Strand family's business network. Someone credible enough to hold the position, but without the social architecture that would make the arrangement visible. Someone credible but disconnected. Someone with enough to lose to take it seriously. Someone Serena translated privately who was out of options. "And Mr. Strand?" she asked. "What does he get out of this?" Another glance. "Stability," Constance said. "His daughter needs a stable domestic situation. The arrangement provides that. His daughter, 6 years old. Her name is Wren." Serena looked at the contract on the table. 41 pages. She'd read contracts before in the life she used to have. This one had the specific density of something that had been written and rewritten until it said exactly what someone needed it to say and nothing else. "I need to meet him first," she said. Constance's expression didn't change. "That's not standard. I understand it's not standard." Serena kept her voice level. "You're asking me to share a home with a stranger and his child for 18 months. I see his face before I sign anything." The man beside Constance made a small sound that might have been approval. Constance pressed her lips together. "Tomorrow," she said. "It's 2 o'clock. The address they gave her was in the Garment District, a building that had been a textile warehouse in a previous life and was now something harder to categorize. The lobby was small, utilitarian, a buzzer. A freight elevator with a handwritten sign taped to the inside that said 3rd floor only on Tuesdays. Serena took the stairs. The 3rd floor turned out to be a woodworking studio, not a showroom. An actual studio. Sawdust on the floor, half-finished cabinets along one wall, the smell of linseed oil and wood shavings so thick it was almost a texture. A man was working at the far end, sanding something that looked like it might eventually be a table, his back to her. He hadn't heard her come in over the noise of the belt sander. Serena stood in the doorway and watched him work. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, though she couldn't have said why she'd expected anything, with the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than a gym membership. His dark hair was pushed back with the careless efficiency of someone who hadn't thought about it. He moved with a precision that struck her as unusual. Not the rough-and-ready pace of someone doing a job quickly, something more deliberate than that, more controlled. He turned off the sander and turned around, and the first thing Serena noticed was his eyes. Not the color, brown, ordinary, But the way they looked at her, measuring, not unkind but not warm, the look of someone who had gotten very good at assessing situations quickly and was already assessing this one. Serena Voss, he said. Not a question, Mr. Strand. He set down the sander and picked up a rag, wiping sawdust from his hands with the same methodical precision. They tell you I'm a carpenter. They said woodworker. Same thing. He nodded toward a workbench along the wall where two stools sat. You want to sit? She did. He didn't. He stayed standing, leaning against the workbench with his arms crossed, and Serena had the distinct impression that this was a man who preferred to remain near an exit. You want to know why, he said. I want to know a lot of things, Serena said. Why is one of them? Something moved across his face, not quite amusement. The arrangement keeps Wren in her school, her routines, he paused, choosing the word deliberately, her sense of normal. She's been through enough changes. Having a household that looks stable means she doesn't have to absorb more disruption. And a contract marriage accomplishes that. A household accomplishes that. The contract is just paperwork. Serena looked at him. He looked back. Somewhere in the building below them, a door slammed. I grew up without a mother, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way things did sometimes. Unplanned but right. She was there, technically. But she was sick for a long time. I know what it's like to be sick and not understand why the adults around you look worried all the time. She held his gaze. I'm not going to walk into a little girl's life and disappear in 18 months like I was never there. If I'm in this, I'm actually in it. Elliot Strand was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed off the workbench and grabbed a jacket from a hook near the door. Come on, he said. Where? You should meet Wren before you decide anything. The apartment was in Brooklyn, a brown stone floor-through that smelled like beeswax and faintly crayon. It was tidy in the specific way of a home where one person worked very hard to maintain order against the entropy of a small child. Books on the shelf alphabetized, dishes stacked precisely, and then in the corner of the living room, an explosion of art supplies that had clearly been granted sovereign territory and was exercising it aggressively. Wren has an art corner, Elliot said, catching Serena looking. Don't let her show you everything or we'll be here until Thursday. A woman came out of the kitchen, 40s, warm eyes, flour on her apron. She stopped when she saw Serena, and her expression did something complicated. This is Beverly, Elliot said. She helps with Wren after school. And in the mornings, Beverly said, and some evenings, and once on a Tuesday when you forgot you had a dentist appointment. She turned to Serena with the frank assessment of someone who had earned the right to opinions. It's nice to meet you. Then there was a sound from the hallway. Small feet, fast. The girl who launched herself around the corner had her father's dark eyes and approximately 4 times his energy. She was wearing paint-covered overalls and one boot. The other boot was absent for reasons no one would ever fully explain, and she stopped abruptly when she saw Serena, going from full sprint to complete stillness in a way that was somehow both startling and endearing. Daddy has a visitor, Wren announced, as though informing the room of something it might have missed. This is Ms. Voss, Elliot said. Can you say hello? Wren studied Serena with the focused intensity of someone conducting a very serious evaluation. Then she said, Do you know how to make a bird feeder? Serena blinked. I don't. I'm making one. Beverly says we need to let it dry, but I think it's dry enough already. Bird feeders need to dry completely or the seeds stick to the wet glue, Serena said, because it was true and it seemed like relevant information. Wren's eyes went wide. How do you know that? I tried to rush a bird feeder once when I was about your age. It was not a good outcome for anyone. Something shifted in Wren's expression. She grabbed Serena's hand with fingers that were definitely still a little gluey and pulled her toward the art corner with the absolute confidence of someone who had decided a decision was already made. Come see it. You can tell me if it needs more drying. The bird feeder did need more drying. It was also the most ambitious bird feeder Serena had ever seen, incorporating what appeared to be 3 separate roof structures and a functional door. This is incredible, Serena said and meant it. It's for the cardinal, Wren said seriously. There's one that comes to the window. His name is Herbert. Herbert is a very good name for a cardinal. Wren looked pleased, I know. Later, while Wren was showing Beverly the agreed-upon drying status of the bird feeder, Elliot walked Serena to the door. He stood in the hallway with his hands in his jacket pockets, and for a moment he looked less like a man who'd been calculating angles and more like a man who was very tired of carrying something alone. She doesn't warm up to people easily, he said quietly. She's cautious. He stopped. Like you, Serena said. He didn't confirm or deny. She told me last week that she wished she had someone to do girl things with, which apparently includes bird feeders and also, braiding. Things I'm not equipped for. And you thought a contract marriage would solve that. I thought stability would solve that. This is the vehicle. His voice was matter-of-fact. I'm not going to pretend it's something it's not. Serena looked at him in the dim hallway light. What are you pretending it's not? He met her eyes. Necessary, but not simple. She left the brownstone thinking about a 6-year-old girl with paint on her overalls and a cardinal named Herbert and a father who spoke in precise, careful sentences like he'd learned that imprecise words got people hurt. She signed the contract the next morning. She told herself it was the money, the job, her mother's bills. She told herself she wasn't already thinking about Wren, about the bird feeder, about the way Elliot Strand's hands had stilled on the workbench when she'd talked about growing up with a sick mother. She was lying to herself. It would not be the last time. The wedding happened on a Wednesday. A judge, 2 witnesses from the law firm, and a lobby that smelled like nothing in particular. Elliot wore a clean white shirt and dark pants and said I do like he was confirming a measurement. Serena wore a gray dress she'd bought 2 years ago for a work event and said I do while looking at the peeling paint on the wall above the judge's left shoulder. No flowers. No guests. A handshake afterward, brief and businesslike. Then the judge said, "Congratulations," and it felt like the strangest word in the English language. On the sidewalk outside, Constance handed Serena a folder. The apartment address is inside. You'll move in Saturday. The brownstone in Brooklyn. You'll be in the West Village, Elliot said. He'd appeared behind her without making a sound, which was a thing she would learn he did. The Brooklyn apartment is where I work. We're moving somewhere larger. You didn't mention. I'm mentioning it now. He flagged a cab without looking at her. Beverly's bringing Wren. You'll have your own bedroom, your own bathroom, office space if you need it. The kitchen's well stocked. He opened the cab door. Get in if you want a ride. Serena got in. She was beginning to understand that Elliot Strand communicated in information rather than feelings, and that what looked like coldness was actually something else. Precision. A man who said exactly what he meant and nothing else, because somewhere along the way, he'd decided that extra words were where things went wrong. The apartment in the West Village was not what she expected. She'd expected something appropriate for a carpenter. Functional, minimal. What she got was a top-floor unit in a converted building with 14-foot ceilings and a kitchen that had clearly been designed by someone who actually cooked. The bedroom they'd prepared for her had a window seat overlooking the street, bookshelves built into the wall, and a reading lamp positioned exactly where she would have put one herself. How did you know? She started. I didn't, Elliot said. I asked Beverly to set it up. She has opinions. Beverly had opinions. Serena was already grateful for them. Wren arrived 40 minutes later, ahead of Beverly at top speed. She burst through the apartment door, skidded to a stop in the middle of the living room, turned a complete circle, and announced, There's a window seat. I'm going to read on it. That's Ms. Voss's room, Beverly said from the doorway. Wren turned to Serena with an expression of elaborate negotiation already forming. Can I sometimes read in there? I'll ask first every time. You can read in there whenever you want, Serena said. But you have to actually ask. I said I would. Then yes. Wren beamed with the focused intensity of someone who had just won a significant diplomatic victory. Then she ran down the hallway to find her own room, and that, Serena supposed, was that. That night, after Wren was asleep and Beverly had gone home, Serena found Elliot in the kitchen. He'd changed into jeans and a worn flannel shirt and was making something that smelled like garlic and rosemary, moving through the kitchen with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. You cook, she said. I had to learn. He didn't look up from the pan. Wren has opinions about food. Strong ones. What does she like? Pasta. Soup with the right noodles. She'll tell you which noodles are right. There's a list. Anything involving cheese. She is skeptical of most vegetables, but has a specific, inexplicable enthusiasm for snap peas. Serena sat at the kitchen island. This was not how she'd imagined spending the first night of her marriage. She hadn't imagined spending it any particular way, but this, sitting at a marble island in a West Village apartment, watching a man she'd known for 4 days make pasta and explain her preferences for snap peas, was a surprise in the specific category of not unpleasant. Why me? She asked. Really? He was quiet for a moment, stirring. You have operational experience, but no social ties to my world, he said. You needed something badly enough to take this seriously. And you told Wren the truth about the bird feeder, instead of just agreeing with her. That's a small thing. Small things are how you find out what people are actually like. He finally looked at her. You didn't try to perform for her. You just talked to her. Serena didn't know what to say to that. She looked at the garlic browning in the pan and thought about Wren's face when she'd said Herbert is a very good name for a cardinal. The simple directness of it. The way some kids looked at you and actually looked. What happened to her mother? She asked. Elliot's hand stilled on the spoon. He didn't answer for a long moment, and she thought she'd pushed too far, but then he said quietly, 3 years ago, she got sick. It was fast. Another pause. Wren doesn't fully understand. She knows her mother isn't coming back. She knows she's loved. That has to be enough for now. Serena thought about that, about how much of parenting was deciding what had to be enough for now, and living with the gap between that and what you actually wanted to give. I'm sorry, she said. He nodded once and went back to stirring. The garlic caught the light. The job started Monday. Serena walked into the Caldwell Ventures building on 6th Avenue, 28 floors, a lobby that cost more to maintain monthly than her old office had cost annually, and tried to look like she'd walked into rooms like this every day of her life. She mostly pulled it off. Her office was on the 24th floor, a view of the Hudson. An assistant named Phoebe, who had preloaded Serena's calendar, organized her briefing materials by priority level and left a very good cup of coffee on the desk with the wordless competence of someone who understood that executives needed caffeine before they needed anything else. The first meeting was with the senior leadership team, 7 people, 6 of whom watched her the way people watched an unfamiliar animal enter a familiar habitat. One of them, Roland Fitch, Chief Investment Officer, 53, the particular kind of handsome that came from decades of people agreeing with him, watched her the way a chess player watches an opponent they've already decided to underestimate. Mrs. Voss, he said, the warmth in his voice precise and targeted. We've been looking forward to having fresh perspective in the leadership seat. Fresh perspective, the corporate euphemism, for we don't know who you are and we're waiting to see if you'll fail. Thank you, Mr. Fitch. She sat at the head of the table. I've reviewed the last 3 quarters. I have some thoughts on the Meridian portfolio. Roland's expression flickered. The Meridian portfolio was his. It's a complex position. It's an overexposed position, Serena said calmly. You're carrying 40% concentration in one sector during a period of regulatory uncertainty. That's not complexity. It's risk that hasn't been managed yet. She looked around the table. I'd like to discuss rebalancing before the end of the month. Silence. Phoebe, standing near the wall, made a very small, very professional sound that might have been amusement. The meeting continued. By the end, Serena had identified 2 other pressure points, made clear she'd done her homework, and established, without stating it, that she was not, in fact, here to be managed. Roland caught her in the hallway after. His smile was still warm, but the temperature behind it had changed. You've done your research. That's generally the job. Caldwell has its own way of doing things. Relationships that took years to build. I'd hate to see those disrupted by, he paused, enthusiasm. I understand you've been here a long time, Serena said. I respect that. But relationships shouldn't be a reason to avoid uncomfortable conversations. It should be the reason those conversations can happen at all. She walked away before he could respond. Her hands were steady. She didn't let them shake until she was back in her office with the door closed. That evening, she came home to the smell of something cooking and Wren at the kitchen table with her homework spread across most of the available surface. Mrs. Voss, Wren said, without looking up from what appeared to be a math worksheet. Herbert came to the feeder today. Serena sat down across from her. How does it look? The feeder. Wren looked up. It held. Beverly says the extra drying time was smart. The extra drying time was your decision. I know. Wren looked pleased with herself, in the serene way of someone who had always known they were right. Do you know times tables? Some of them? 7 times 8, 56? That's the hard one, Wren said approvingly. She went back to her worksheet. Daddy's making soup. The good noodles. Serena looked up to find Elliot standing in the kitchen doorway, watching them with an expression she couldn't fully read. He met her eyes when he caught her looking, held them for a moment, then went back to the soup without saying anything. Something about that, the watching, the brief held gaze, the not saying anything, lodged in her chest in a way that she categorically refused to examine. Weeks passed, weeks that had the strange shape of something almost normal. Serena went to work, navigated the politics of a firm where Roland Fitch had spent a decade building alliances, and didn't intend to share the board's confidence. Elliot went to the studio, came home smelling like sawdust, ate dinner with Wren and Serena in a rhythm that had established itself without anyone designing it. Tuesday nights, Wren chose the movie. Thursdays, Elliot made the elaborate soup Wren called the good kind. Saturdays, if the weather was right, they walked to the farmer's market 3 blocks away, and Wren had strong opinions about which strawberries were worth purchasing. One Saturday, 4 weeks in, Serena woke early and found Elliot already in the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee made, the paper open to the crossword. He pushed 1 cup toward her without looking up. 7 letters, he said. A place where things that don't belong together somehow do. She sat down. Mosaic, she said. He filled it in. She stole the paper and worked on the right side. For an hour they sat at that table and didn't say much of anything, and it was the most comfortable silence Serena had experienced in longer than she could accurately calculate. She did not examine that either. The first professional crisis hit 6 weeks after she started. Roland Fitch had been working quietly, the way confident men did when they were certain of their outcome. He'd maneuvered 2 board members into questioning the meridian rebalancing, not openly, but through the specific architecture of doubt seated in private conversations that happened to produce public hesitation. Serena found out on a Tuesday, 3 hours before the board call she'd scheduled to present the rebalancing proposal, when Phoebe put a note on her desk that said, FYI, board members Chen and Hartwick are expected to abstain rather than approve. Source. Reliable. She called Elliot. She'd started doing that, she realized. Not because the contract required it, because he answered the phone like he'd been waiting for her to call. Roland's been working the board, she said. How much time do you have? 3 hours. A pause. Come home. We'll work through it. She did. They spread the financials across the dining room table while Wren built something in her room with what sounded like an unreasonable number of small wooden blocks that Beverly had apparently acquired for reasons that were never fully explained. Elliot went through the numbers the way he worked with wood, finding the grain, following it. You're presenting this as risk management, he said. They're hearing it as criticism of past decisions. That's the problem. It is risk management. I know. But frame it as opportunity. Given current market conditions, we're positioned to accelerate into, not we've been overexposed in. You're right either way. One version lets them feel like they're moving forward. She stared at him. Where did you learn this? He didn't answer immediately. He moved a column of figures and recalculated something in the margin of the printout, his handwriting precise and small. Earlier life, he said finally. Long time ago. What did you do? Before the woodworking. He looked up. His expression didn't close exactly, but something in it reorganized. Things I don't talk about. That's not an answer. It's the one I have. They looked at each other across the table covered in financial printouts. Wren's blocks clicked rhythmically down the hall. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing piano. Something slow and imperfect, a student working through a difficult passage. The board presentation, he said finally, redirecting. Show them the 3-year model with the rebalanced portfolio against the current exposure. Let the numbers make the argument. She rebuilt the presentation in 90 minutes. When the board call happened, she opened with opportunity language, presented the 3-year model first, and let Chen and Hart come to the risk conclusion themselves. They both voted to approve. Roland Fitch was the only dissenting vote. He shook her hand afterward with professional warmth and the eyes of someone recalculating. Effective presentation, he said. Thank you for the feedback you gave last week, Serena said. The concern about relationships is valid. I took it seriously. She hadn't really. But she'd learned early that making people feel heard was different from agreeing with them, and Roland Fitch very much needed to feel heard. That evening, Elliot made dinner while Serena and Wren sat on the window seat with the Birdfield guide Beverly had found at a library sale. Wren was compiling a list of birds that might theoretically visit the feeder, ranked by probability. Herbert remained number 1. Can I ask you something? Wren said, without looking up from the field guide. Sure. Are you and Daddy getting actually married? Beverly said sometimes grown-ups do a practice marriage first. Serena's hands stilled on the page. She could hear Elliot in the kitchen, very quiet. A bowl set down gently. She thought about what Wren deserved. Not comfort. Not a performance. The actual truth dressed in words a 6-year-old could hold. Your daddy and I made an agreement, she said carefully, to live together for a while. It's a real agreement, but it's different from the kind of marriage where people have been in love a long time. Wren considered this. Like a trial run. Something like that. My friend Simone's parents did a trial run, and then they got a real married. Wren looked up. Will you do that? The real married part? Serena looked into those dark, careful eyes. Elliot's eyes. The eyes of someone who had been asked to trust something and was not yet sure they should, and felt something enormous and inconvenient shift in her chest. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere without talking to you about it first. That's a promise. Wren looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, with the gravity of someone who had accepted terms and intended to hold both parties to them. She went back to the field guide. Red-bellied woodpecker, possible, goldfinch, likely. Purple martin, optimistic but not impossible. When Serena finally looked up, Elliot was standing in the kitchen doorway. He'd been there long enough to hear. His expression was doing something she hadn't seen from him before. Something unguarded. something that moved through him and got partially controlled before it reached his face. He went back to the stove without speaking. But the thing she'd seen stayed with her for the rest of the night, like a word she'd found that she didn't yet know how to use. The gala was Roland's idea, technically, which meant it was Roland's move. Annual Caldwell Partners event, black tie. Spouses and partners expected. Serena told Elliot 2 weeks out. He said, "I don't do galas." She said, "You do now." He showed up in a suit that fit like it had been made for someone who once occupied a very different life. Standing in the doorway of the apartment before they left, he looked at her, emerald dress, borrowed confidence, the earrings her mother had given her for her 30th, and said, "You look good." "So do you," she said, which is suspicious for a woodworker. Something moved in his eyes. He held the door. The ballroom was the kind of room that was designed to make ordinary people feel small. Roland worked it like a man on home turf, which he was. He found them within 12 minutes of their arrival. "Messieurs Voss," he said. "And this must be Elliot Strand," Elliot said. His handshake was measured. His voice was quiet. "I've heard a great deal about you, Roland." Roland's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. "Good things, I hope. Interesting things." Serena felt something in the exchange that she couldn't fully parse. Roland measuring Elliot and finding something he hadn't expected. Elliot completely still in the way of someone who had nothing to prove and therefore never needed to prove it. Later, on the dance floor because appearances required it, Elliot's hand at her waist with the careful precision he brought to everything, Serena said quietly, "He's going to dig. Let him. Elliot, if he finds, he won't find what he's looking for." The music was something slow and probably expensive. Other couples moved around them in the particular performance of black tie dancing. "Trust me on that." She did, she realized. She wasn't sure when that had happened. It was one of those things you noticed after. The way you noticed you knew a song's lyrics. Not when you learned them, just when you already did. On the ride home, quiet in the back of the car, she said, "There's more to you than the woodworking. Everyone has more than what's visible." That's true. It's also not an answer. He was quiet for most of the rest of the drive. Then, "I used to be someone who thought that being very powerful meant being very safe. I was wrong about that in a way that cost people I loved." He looked out the window. "The work I do now, it matters in proportion to itself. A table that holds weight, a cabinet that opens cleanly. I know exactly what I've made and exactly what it does. That's what I needed." Serena sat with that. "And the arrangement? What is this? In proportion to itself?" He didn't answer. She wasn't sure he knew how. Roland's move came 6 weeks later, the week Serena had been nominated to the board's executive committee. It was efficient and almost elegant. He'd surfaced a question about the Strand family's historical financial records, specifically a corporate entity that had been dissolved 4 years ago under circumstances that Roland presented, in a private meeting with 2 board members, as worth examining. Serena didn't know about it until Phoebe put a note on her desk. "Fitch meeting with Chen and Hartwick. No calendar record. Source, building security log." She told Elliot that night after Wren was asleep. Beverly had gone home. They were at the kitchen table again, and this time the silence had weight. "The dissolved entity," she said. "What is it?" He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "A holding company. It was my father's originally. After he died, I ran it for 3 years. Things happened that I won't get into that made dissolution the right choice." "Did you do something illegal?" "No. Flat and certain. But I was involved in a business environment where other people did, and I knew enough that I became a liability to some of them. The dissolution was part of getting out cleanly. And Roland? Roland is connected to people in that world. Not deeply, but enough to have heard things." Elliot set down the cup. "He's not looking for truth, he's looking for leverage." Serena was quiet for a moment. "If he presents this to the board, then we handle it. Together." He looked at her directly, and she was struck again by the quality of his attention. The way he looked at her like she was entirely real to him, like she had been from the beginning, even when she hadn't quite been real to herself. "You don't have to fight this one alone." She'd been fighting things alone for most of her adult life. The reflex was deep and well practiced. This is where she should say, "I'll handle it," the way she always did. "I know," she said instead, and left it there. The following week, before Roland could make his move officially, Serena requested a private meeting with Richard Caldwell himself, the firm's founder, who was in his 70s and came in on Thursdays and had, until now, been largely a portrait on the lobby wall. He turned out to be a small man with sharp eyes and no patience for performance. She laid the Meridian results on his desk. She laid her first quarter projections beside them. She told him plainly that there was a pressure campaign underway from within his own firm, that it was not about the firm's interests, and that she intended to remain in this role and make it worth his while. He looked at her for a long moment. Roland's been here 19 years, he said. I know. He's built a lot. I know that too. Richard Caldwell picked up the Q1 projection. This a realistic number or an optimistic number? Conservative. I can show you the model. He waved a hand. I'll have Phoebe schedule time. He looked at her again. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd need more time to figure out the room. He almost smiled. You already know the room. 2 days later, Roland Fitch was moved to an advisory role. He accepted it with the grace of a man who understood what it meant and the professionalism of a man who'd been in this business long enough to know how to absorb a loss. He shook Serena's hand in the hallway and said simply, "Well played, no hard feelings," she said. "Some feelings," he admitted, "but they're mine to manage." She almost liked him for that. The night Serena came home from the meeting with Caldwell, she found Wren in the kitchen teaching Elliot a card game she'd invented, with rules that appeared to be evolving in real time in Wren's favor. "Miss Voss," Wren said, "Daddy is losing because he keeps forgetting the rule about the jacks." "The rule about the jacks was added 30 seconds ago," Elliot said. "Rules can be added after the game starts. That's when you find out you need them." Serena sat down and accepted a hand of cards from Wren. Elliot looked at her over his own cards with an expression she'd been cataloging for weeks now, the way his face did something in those evening moments that it never did anywhere else. Less controlled, more actual. "Roland," he said. "Handled," she said. Something eased in him that she hadn't known was tense. "Good. Jack of Hearts is worth -5 now," Wren announced. "Is it?" Elliot said. "I just decided." They played 3 rounds, which Wren won decisively due to ongoing jurisdictional authority over the rules. Afterward, Wren went to bed with minimal protest, which Beverly would have said was suspicious, and was. When Serena checked 20 minutes later, Wren was asleep sitting up against her headboard with the Bird Field Guide open in her lap, one finger still resting on a picture of a cedar waxwing. She lifted the book gently and set it on the nightstand. She clicked off the overhead light and left the nightlight on, the one shaped like a crescent moon that Wren had chosen herself and that cast everything in a soft amber. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at this child she'd known for 8 weeks, who had made her a card with a drawing of Herbert the Cardinal for her office, who had explained the optimal drying protocol for bird feeders with perfect seriousness, who asked questions that landed like stones in water. She was not keeping distance. She had never been keeping distance. She had known that almost from the start. In the hallway, Elliot was waiting. He did that, appeared without sound, as if proximity was the only way he knew to say certain things. "She's asleep," Serena said. "She fights it, and then surrenders completely. Entirely," he said. There was something in his voice, like someone else I know. She looked at him. He was leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets, and he looked like a man who had been standing at the edge of something for a while and was trying to decide what to do about it. "Elliot," she said. "The arrangement ends in 10 months, he said, not harshly. "Just place there, carefully, the way he placed things. I know, and you'll have everything you were promised. The position, the salary, I know." She took a breath. "Is that what you want to talk about? The arrangement?" He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she heard the building settle around them, the ambient murmur of the city 16 floors down. "No," he said finally. "It's not." She waited. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Want something without controlling it. Want someone." He stopped, started again. "I've been telling myself this was a transaction. That Wren needed stability and you needed opportunity, and the math worked, and that's enough of a reason for most things." "Is it enough?" He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had in the woodshop the first day, the same precision, the same absolute attention. Except this time it was aimed somewhere she hadn't let anyone aim in a long time. "No," he said, "I don't think it is. Not anymore." Serena stood in the amber light coming from Wren's room and thought about all the ways she'd told herself this was something manageable, professional, temporary. She'd told herself that right up until Wren fell asleep with her finger on a picture of a cedar waxwing, until Elliot pushed her coffee across the table on Saturday mornings without being asked, until she'd understood somewhere in her body before she understood it anywhere else that she had already made her choice. "I'm not leaving at the end of the 18 months, she said. He looked at her. "Serena, I'm telling you what I want. You can tell me what you want and we'll figure out what it means." She met his eyes. That's how this works when it's real. He was quiet for so long she thought she'd miscalculated. Then he pushed off the wall, and he was very close, and he said quietly, "I don't want you to leave." "Then say that. I just did once more." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but related to one. "I don't want you to leave," he said again. "Any part of this. I don't want you to leave any part of this." She exhaled. The building settled again. Down the hall, Wren's nightlight held its amber steady. They stood in the hallway for a long time after that, not quite touching, close enough that it didn't matter, both of them aware that they had crossed into something that couldn't be recrossed. Later, much later, sitting at the kitchen table with tea neither of them needed, Elliot told her more of it. The holding company. His father, who had been well connected and not always careful about which connections he made. The 3 years Elliot had spent after his father's death trying to run something he hadn't built and didn't believe in, and the decision, expensive, complicated, final, to walk away from all of it. Is it over? She asked. The risk, the exposure, is it actually over? Most of it. He was honest in the way he always was, without softening. There are people who weren't happy when I left. Roland found one of them. There may be more. Are we in danger? He looked at her. The we was new. Both of them felt it. I don't think so. But I'm not going to tell you it's nothing either. He paused. I should have told you more of this earlier. You told me what you thought was mine to know. That was arrogant a little, she agreed. But I understand why. She wrapped her hands around her mug. We do it differently from now on. Differently, he said, like he was testing the word's structural integrity. Like people who are actually in this together. He nodded slowly. I can do that. 2 days later, the thing Elliot had been quietly managing became less quiet. A man named Philip Garrett, who had done business with the Strand Holding Company 6 years ago and had not appreciated the dissolution, sent a registered letter to Caldwell Ventures' legal department. He alleged that Elliot held information that was Garrett's proprietary business intelligence, and that his continued relationship with Caldwell Ventures' CEO constituted a conflict of interest. It was not technically illegal, what Garrett had done. It was designed to be disruptive. Serena took it to Caldwell himself before she even went back to her office. She explained the holding company, Elliot's exit, what Garrett was actually doing. Richard Caldwell read the letter twice. Is any of it true? Elliot holds information, Serena said. It's his own information about his own former company. There's no conflict. Your relationship with Strand is real and disclosed, and it doesn't affect my judgment, which I've had 18 months of Meridian results to demonstrate. She looked at him steadily. This is noise. Garrett wants to create a problem where there isn't one because Elliot's exit cost him something. I'm asking you to see it for what it is. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. Then he set the letter aside. Get me the full Strand Company history. And the Q2 projection. I want to see it by Friday. You'll have it Thursday, she told Elliot that evening. He was quiet while she walked him through it, and she watched something happen in him. The specific loosening of a man who has held himself braced for impact and is slowly understanding the impact isn't coming. You went to Caldwell first, he said, before anyone else could get there, yes. That was. He paused. You didn't have to. I told you. We do it differently now. She looked at him. You would have done the same. He was quiet, then yes. And, after a moment, thank you. Philip Garrett went quiet after Caldwell's legal team sent a formal response. It was not the end of everything. There were, Elliot acknowledged, still people who had reasons to be unhappy, but the immediate pressure lifted. The air in the apartment felt different for a few days. The specific relief of a held breath released. Wren noticed, in the way Wren noticed everything. You and Daddy both seem better, she announced at breakfast one morning. We worked something out, Serena said. Wren nodded seriously. Adults should do that more. You're not wrong. I'm usually not. She poured an enormous amount of syrup on her pancakes. Herbert came back yesterday, with a friend. The friend doesn't have a name yet. What are you thinking? Wren considered. I'm thinking Gerald is an excellent cardinal name. Beverly, from the kitchen doorway, made a sound of pure affection. Elliot, across the table, caught Serena's eye over his coffee cup, and something warm and precise and exactly like him moved across his face. 6 months after that first morning at the woodworking studio, Wren asked, not for the first time, about the arrangement. She was brushing her teeth. Serena was sitting on the edge of the tub, keeping her company, which had become a ritual neither of them had decided on. The trial run, Wren said, with a mouthful of toothpaste. Is it still a trial run? Spit first, Serena said. Wren spit with great commitment. Then, is it? Serena looked at this child she loved. She allowed herself the word completely without qualification. With her dark eyes and her dental hygiene opinions and her cardinal named Herbert and her steadfast conviction that time should be taken on bird feeders. No, Serena said. I don't think it is anymore. Wren rinsed. Thought about this. Are you going to do the real married part? I think we might be figuring that out. Because the trial part is a lot of work, Wren said helpfully. And you're already here all the time anyway. That's a very practical point. I know. She handed Serena her toothbrush to put away. Because this too had become a ritual. I'm going to go say goodnight to Daddy. She ran down the hall. Serena sat on the edge of the tub for a moment longer, listening to the sound of small feet and Elliot's quiet voice saying, "Hey, bird girl, how was your evening?" and Wren's full accounting of Herbert's companion Gerald and the new theory about purple martins, and thought, this is what choosing something looks like. Not falling, not being swept, waking up one day inside a life you recognize as yours. They made it real on a Tuesday, not a ceremony, or not much of one. Elliot came home from the studio, still smelling like wood shavings, and found Serena at the dining table with 2 cups of coffee and the crossword, and he sat down across from her and said, "I don't want a contract this time." "No," she agreed, "just us. And Wren," obviously Wren. He picked up a pen, studied the crossword, 5 letters, the state of having found where you were always meant to be. Serena looked at the clue, then at him. "Home," she said. He smiled. He filled it in. She stole the paper and worked on her half, and they sat at the table in the late afternoon light, not saying anything, both of them aware that the quiet was full, not empty, not careful, not managed, just full. Wren came home 20 minutes later with Beverly, a feather she'd found on the sidewalk that she was fairly certain had belonged to a cedar waxwing, and strong opinions about where it should be kept. Serena made room for it on the windowsill. Elliot looked at them both, his daughter holding a feather like a discovery, Serena making space for it without being asked, and something in the line of his shoulders settled in a way it maybe hadn't settled in years. Some things you can't plan for. Some things arrive as a contract, a bird feeder, a 6-year-old's unsentimental announcement that the trial run is clearly over. Some things find you at the edge of your endurance and turn out to be what you were actually looking for. Serena had walked into Maddox and Hale looking for a way out of debt, and into a future she'd stopped believing she deserved. What she'd found, over 18 months of Saturdays at the farmer's market and kitchen table crosswords, and a cardinal named Herbert, and a man who said, "I don't want you to leave," like it cost him something real to admit it, was simpler than she'd expected and harder to describe. She'd found that survival and belonging are different things. That a family isn't always what you're given, and a home isn't always where you started, and a contract signed under fluorescent lights in a building that smelled like carpet cleaner can become, if you let it, the beginning of something you'd choose again every single day. She'd choose it again every single day.